From the Twitter account of OJ Simpson on April 10th, our father, Orenthal James Simpson, succumbed to his battle with cancer. He was surrounded by his children and grandchildren. During this time of transition, his family asks you that we please respect their wishes for privacy and grace. This Simpson family. OJ Simpson, dead at the age of who gives a fuck, counseled to OJ. You can get right off this planet, man. And I understand that we're talking about OJ Simpson's family here, not OJ himself sending this tweet. But the nerve to say he was surrounded by his children and grandchildren. You know who doesn't get that benefit? The Brown family. They don't get to be surrounded by their children and grandchildren because OJ murdered their daughter. Please respect the family's wishes. I bet you that the Goldman family wishes that you respected them wishing that you didn't murder their son. So maybe just a little bit of awareness when you're putting out a public statement like this. Just be like, I don't know, maybe just mention that our dad's dead and we don't need to go into it much further because he's a double murderer. I'm just happy that we are done with this weird phase of the OJ story where I would say for the last like 10 years, he was like kind of a media celebrity. Like when OJ joined Twitter, it was like trending all over the world. And I mean, I was even guilty of it. Like, what's OJ going to tweet from like a morbid curiosity thing? But then it became like he's doing guest appearances on shows. He's giving out fantasy football advice. He had his little catchphrase like, oh, hello, world. Like, this guy murdered 2 people. And the whole world was kind of like, oh, it's, you know, our crazy Uncle OJ. Grandpa OJ, isn't it wacky and zany? He fucking murdered people. So let's not forget that. But that's why we're doing this video, actually, because there's a lot of shit you forget about OJ Simpson. And actually, at this point, now being, 30 years later, it's stuff that people didn't even forget because they never even knew it. So we're going to break down some of the 5, lesser known things or things you forgot about the OJ case that were absolutely ridiculous. First off, I just want to say to all the people who are like, he wasn't guilty. He was never proven guilty. It's like, that was not because he didn't fucking murder them. That was because of a plethora of reasons about how the prosecution handled it, how the defense handled it, and what was going on in America at that time. Johnny Cochran and the Dream Team blew holes in that prosecution's case left and right, not because he didn't do it, simply because Marsha Clark and Chris Darden didn't know what the fuck they were doing. America was a racial powder keg at the time, and it was the perfect storm with a racist cop who mishandled some evidence for this guy to get off. And one of the biggest things that was talked about was race in this case, specifically Mark Furman being a racist LAPD cop. He was caught on camera and on video and on record saying the N-word dozens of times, which then was brought into the trial. And then race became a factor, and Black America was at a time after the Watts riots and Rodney King that everything was kind of bubbling to a point where it played a major factor in this case. But one of the things that's not talked about is what Time magazine did with OJ's mugshot. Look at this picture here of Time magazine posted their mugshot like every other publication did, except Time magazine decided to make him darker, make his face blacker, like very drastically so. If you look at the picture on Newsweek, it's just his regular face. You look at the picture on Time magazine, it is a darker, blacker version of his face, which I have no fucking clue why they did that. They said it was submitted to an artist, a photographer, and he was able to do what he saw fit with it. And I believe his claim was like they wanted to make it darker to look more ominous. Well, that's not how that's going to be received, folks. That's going to be received as you're trying to make this guy look blacker. And that is going to be an issue. So in the courtroom, outside of the courtroom, all across America, that is insane to do. There's just no goddamn reason for that. You got the mugshot. It's the picture of the century. You don't need to touch it at all, let alone be like, let's make it darker. Why would you do that? And of course, guys like Johnny Cochran and the team are jumping all over that, being like, this is an issue about race. This is racism in America. And it was the perfect time in our country's history to play that card. One of the other bizarre instances that kind of gets glossed over, one of the major players in this case, is Kato Kaelin. Kato Kaelin was one of the prime figures in this case because he was just living in OJ and Nicole's houses. And I know that you're a celebrity, you've got multiple mansions, and people are leeches, and they bum money off of you, and hey, can I stay in your house? And I'm sure that kind of stuff happens all the time. But the way that Kato Kaelin he was first living in Nicole Brown's guest house. And then OJ was like, I don't like you being around my ex-wife that much. We're going to get back together. Go live in my guest house. And the story goes that the night of the murder, Kato Kaelin was at home and was helping OJ Simpson pack his bags away, except for one bag that OJ was like, no, don't touch that. Now, again, as the reporting goes, it's just like, Mr. Kaelin, who was a house guest of OJ's, what does that fucking mean? We're talking about grown adults here. Unless you're fucking this guy, unless they're romantically involved, why is he living in your house? Reports said that they were so close, he named his dog Kato. What kind of move is that? Who the fuck names their dog after their best friend who's like still alive and living with them? If I just named my dog Feidelberg, how fucking weird would that be? That would be, and if Feidelberg was just living in my guest house and I named my dog Feidelberg, you guys would absolutely assume I'm banging him. But I don't know, back in 94, we were just like, it's a house guest. So Kato Kaelin said that night he had duffel bags full of stuff and that he helped him load it up into a limo that OJ called to Nicole's house. Why was he calling a limo to Nicole's house for him on the night they were murdered? But one bag, he was like, no, don't touch that. Can you imagine if you go out and commit a double murder and you're trying to get rid of all the evidence and you're like, oh, fuck, I got that guy sleeping in my guest house. What am I going to do about that guy when I'm trying to stuff all this evidence away? He'll just help me load it in the trunk. He won't say anything. I named my dog after him. We're best buddies. Talk about an all-time misfire, all-time backfire to be like, I let this guy stay in my house. I didn't think I was going to commit the double murder while he was living there, though. I thought he was.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I always sort of remembered Kato becoming like a rising to superstardom because of this. But I also felt like by the end of it that his testimony was like somewhat dismissed, and it should not have been. I don't know if it was dismissed by the jury, but it just felt like in the public discourse, it didn't really nail anything down. But it says here that he heard loud thumps to the point where he went outside to see if anything was wrong. And that's where he saw the limo. I mean, like, that's, at midnight, if you hear something so loud that you are like, I better go investigate that.
It's dismissed.
And then,
well, you know what I think it was? He was like this long-haired, like, Kato Kaelin, weird name surfer bro. I feel like everyone was just like, I don't know, that's that dumb weirdo. And it was also back at a time where, like, you wouldn't, if like, whoever won that case in court, like, that day, they just, like, bowled over the competition, and there was no internet and a loud mob and true crime
podcast.
Yeah, there was no podcast to be like, wait, what about that guy? Let's go back to that dude, to the point that people would listen. It's kind of like all you had to do was roll over Chris Darden, Marsha Clark, and Judge Lancito, who was like, I'm a celebrity. I'm the most famous judge in the world. They're making fun of me on Saturday Night Live. This is awesome. All you got to do is just convince them, like, no, don't listen to that Kato Kaelin guy. And everyone was like, okay, I guess so. Yeah, because he was the fucking guy who witnessed the murder, basically.
But look at this. I had a radio show, and there would be constant death threats. First of all, you had a radio show. There would be constant death threats to me. There'd be faxes. If anybody, Gen Z, if you don't know, that's like when you could just send a piece of paper. People were faxing death threats. He said there would be faxes saying Kato should be killed to his office.
Let me tell you something. The 1994 Player Haters Ball. Anybody who faxed Kato Kaelin death threats, that's like, yo, that is a level of hate. He called in a bomb threat to the Olympics. This guy faxed a piece of paper to Kato Kaelin's radio show. Imagine being like, just get out my pen and paper here and be like, you should die. And you dial up the
What's their
number,
fax number?
and you put that paper in, and it's like, and then imagine the reception. I would love nothing more. I might have to set up a fax machine in the KFC radio studio, and all of a sudden you hear your fax machine, I guess, ring. Does it ring like a telephone?
Forget voicemails. The new
Send your
submissions.
faxes.
You got to
All of a sudden
fax
it
it.
goes.
Send a facsimile.
I pick it up and it says, "Go fuck yourself." That is a level of hate I never even knew existed. Shout out to the fax machine. So that was Kato Kaelin, who witnessed OJ getting his limo that he called to Nicole's house because the night of the murder, he flew to Chicago. I don't know how that got glossed over, but I have not heard that little tidbit for the last 30 years. The night of the murder, OJ
And returned
flew to
at noon
Chicago
the next
and
day.
then flew back home the next day. Like,
Man, sounds like he needed an alibi.
Yeah, you get the impression that this is a dumb fucking lunatic who doesn't understand how evidence and like science works. Who's just like, well, if I get to Chicago, I'll say I was in Chicago. Until he was like, wait a minute, I didn't leave until like midnight that night, and they're gonna know that. So then he was probably like, fuck, I gotta get back. I gotta get back. Because then they're really going to think that I was running away. So I just went to Chicago for 8 hours while my ex-wife was murdered.
I genuinely do remember seeing, I think it was probably on SportsCenter, like when this was being reported, and it was like the ex-wife of, this superstar, it has been murdered. And then like the next line being like, Simpson was in Chicago at the time and is not currently a suspect. This is talking about like the very first reporting of it, because I think there was until the AC Cowling's white Bronco ride, I think it was like nobody was really sure if he was involved. And then obviously he had that manic episode, and it was like, oh
well, you got to think
prime suspect.
I mean, 94 is still in the grand scheme of things pretty modern, but you got to think like there was a huge period of history where like if you just murdered someone and then like was not around, and you just said like I wasn't there, people were like, all right, I don't know, he wasn't there. We don't know how to figure it out. He said he wasn't there. Yeah. Someone told him
he was like, I was in Chicago, and it was like, well, when were you in Chicago? And it's like for part of the time, obviously he could get to Chicago and back, but
but I don't think OJ's
outside the
like,
window
okay,
when these people were murdered.
When I bought the tickets, when the flight was, and when I got back. So just an all-time bonehead move. That's the funniest thing about this. It's the sloppiest, worst murder ever. He was such a bad murderer. Like he got the job done, and he somehow got acquitted. So I guess he's the best murderer, but he was the worst murderer. There's got to be like other serial killers being like, this guy is disrespecting the game with how bad he is at murdering and covering up this evidence. But the thought that he was gonna like fly to Chicago, and then I think he was probably like, shit, I got to get back now. You dumb fucking bonehead.
And along those lines of like forgotten, like I don't remember hearing anything about a limo, but isn't there a huge amount of blood like in his car?
That's what all that, there was tons of evidence covered in blood down to a.
So did he hop in the car? He was like, should I just drive home? And then he was like, no, let me call a limo and go to Chicago. Like all of this is perplexing. I guess in all of this, you could use it to poke holes and everything and be like, why would he do that? Why was there blood in the car if he took the
I guess
limo?
it's so stupid and so nonsensical that it's like, we don't know what the fuck happened. This guy's an idiot. The evidence was overwhelming in some ways. Everybody knows about the glove. The glove is actually, everybody already knows how important the glove was, but the glove is even more important than people realize. Yes, it led to the infamous, if it don't fit, you must acquit, the most famous line maybe in legal history. I think honestly that single line might have gotten him off. But what's interesting is OJ's defense team initially did not want the glove admitted as evidence. No kidding, because it had his fucking DNA on it because he wore them while he murdered her. So they were trying to get them to throw that out. And that got denied, and it was included in the case. But what ended up happening was the glove was a part of the evidence that Mark Furman ended up fucking up. So the LAPD did not file the evidence correctly. They didn't follow the chain of command and protocol, which throws everything into question. I think somebody took the evidence home with them and like had it in their car and in their house, which then, the jury has to believe that anything could have happened during that time. So not only did it stay in the case, it opened up the door to investigate Mark Furman, who was the one who fucked up the evidence. And when they started to investigate him and discuss him further, that's when they found out that he was a raging racist. So if the glove's not in it, not only do you not have the if it don't fit, you must acquit, you also don't really go down the road of these are racist cops. The two main things that got OJ off was the glove and racism. And none of that would have happened if OJ's defense team got their wishes by keeping it out of the case. And somehow the prosecution still couldn't make that fit because they allowed him to try on the gloves while wearing another pair of gloves. Put on a shirt and then put on another shirt and tell me if that top shirt fits you. Put on a pair of socks and then pull on another pair of socks and tell me if it doesn't fit weird on your feet. If you're wearing gloves and then you put more gloves on, it's not gonna fucking fit. I don't know how Marcia Clark and Chris Darden didn't just stand up and say he's already wearing gloves. Of course they won't. You know what it is? That's a whole mouthful. It didn't rhyme. It didn't rhyme. They needed to come up with something, some other little, they needed to like battle rap with Johnny Cochran and have some rhyme about like, if you're wearing other gloves, it's not gonna love this piece of evidence. You can't just, you gotta have something that combats. If it don't fit, you must acquit. Because him sitting there pulling gloves on top of these white gloves is one of the craziest things to. It's insane. It doesn't fit. Like also that like you need your hands to like your fingers need to be perfect for you to be able to stab somebody. Is another one of my favorites.
But those look like latex gloves. Those are like sticky. Like you're not getting anything
you pull
on top of
leather
those.
gloves over rubber gloves and have it like smoothly go on. I don't know how they pulled that one off. I also don't know how they suppressed the failed polygraph, because nowadays lie detectors are everybody knows that it's a little bit of junk science. It can go wrong. It's not 100%. But I feel like back in 94, if you failed a polygraph, your ass was going to jail. Like, he took a lie detector test. We have machines that can tell if you're lying, and you were. I feel like back then that was a kill shot to your case. But I don't know how that one kind of got skirted as well. Maybe that was the beginning of people realizing that polygraphs aren't always reliable. We should just throw those things out altogether. Because if it's like sometimes it's wrong and sometimes it's right, well, that's not good enough. So I don't know why we ever bother with them at all. But yeah, full-blown failed polygraph. Also, that book he wrote saying, "If I did it," that might be the biggest piece of evidence ever.
It sounds like the lie detector, like even the defense thought that was a terrible idea. So it was Robert Shapiro, who just like immediately hooked him up and gave him a lie detector test. And then once it failed horribly, started asking other members of the team. And F. Lee Bailey said to him when he said, I asked, what should I do next? He says, well, the first thing is stop being an asshole.
Wait, say this again. So Bob Shapiro on the defense
gives him this polygraph test, probably not expecting him to fail spectacularly. So then he asks another defense team member, F. Lee Bailey, what do I do next? And he says, well, the first thing you do is stop being an asshole.
I mean, that is probably
you call before you give the polygraph test.
That might be the only thing that defense team did wrong, because I mean they got dubbed the Dream Team, and it was Kardashian, Shapiro, Dershowitz, and Cochran, of course, and there was like 6 others. I think they said 10 total lawyers, which the money on that must have just been astronomical. But that might have been their only misstep, because everything else, they just fucking dominated Marcia Clark and Chris Darden. Just an all-time ass-kicking in the courtroom that was like straight out of the movies, how badly they got beat. And then there's the biggest conspiracy theory of all, that it's pretty far-fetched, but it is probably the most, because this is so open and shut that OJ just fucking murdered them. There's not many like far-fetched theories, but there is the OJ Simpson's son theory that OJ Simpson's oldest son, who had some mental problems, was actually the one that committed murder. And the theories range from it was him and OJ was trying to cover it up, all the way to OJ was trying to take the fall for his son. And that's why some of the DNA matched, because it was from the same family. And that
Is that how that works,
I
though?
don't think it is, right? I'm
Like,
pretty sure our
I don't
DNA
think
is different, right? So
like there may be some things that are similar, but if it tests positive for
it's
you,
you.
it's you. It's
Yeah.
not me.
But there was some sort of I think there was something about his son, like there was reason to believe that maybe he would have been violent towards her. I don't think it outweighs the 8 times that she called the police and had them show up at her house and they never did anything about domestic violence. I don't think it outweighs Nicole Brown calling a battered wife's shelter and saying my ex-husband is stalking me 5 days before getting murdered. I think there was enough evidence pointing in the direction of this guy is harassing, stalking, getting violent with me, and might kill me, that it was probably OJ. But there's some people on the internet that like to think it was his son and that he was doing some heroic act to try to take the fall for him. I think it's more that he just murdered them and got away with it. So it's one of the craziest cases of all. That day in American history is crazy. It was the Knicks were in the finals. It was OJ's white Bronco chase. It was the opening day for the Olympics, game 5 of the NBA Finals, and Ken Griffey Jr. had just tied Babe Ruth for like the most home runs in June for that date. So we had baseball drama going on, NBA Finals drama, Olympics opening up, and this all-time great athlete like was all of a sudden on a slow speed chase, which I don't think people can grasp that if you weren't. Like I was 9 years old and I remember watching the Knicks in the finals with like a picture-in-picture being like, what the fuck is this? I can't imagine what that would have been like today. It's a very cliche.
At one point, they put the Knicks in the small. Like at one point, they just
Yeah,
had
yeah. The Knicks
the
was
game on, but then they switched it, and the game was.
Little
in the
did we
corner.
know that the craziest thing about that day was it was the Knicks being in the finals. That's the more shocking thing. So it's a cliche thing that they say, like what if you could have one day where Twitter existed, it would have been that day. But man, that would have been absolutely unbelievable during the internet age. And I think the fact that it happened right before it is really one of the only reasons he got off as well, because I think the internet would have changed this case entirely. But OJ Simpson, dead. Who cares? Goodbye. And now we don't have to worry about this asshole ever again.